it's about seed capital and venture capital. And India in the last decade, and especially in the last few years, the last 5, 6 years, startups has become the buzzword. Right? And we always look up to the Silicon Valley and say that Bangalore is a Silicon Valley, and Pune is getting to be one, Hyderabad is getting to be one. So Silicon Valley is always seen as the inspiration for us. It's good that we have 2 panelists with us from the other side of the Silicon Valley, and we, the wannabes, might want to know more from what's working out there and what do we need to do to get to be not Silicon Valley, but Indian Valley or Bangalore Valley, or it's just purely as successful startups. Yeah. Let's start off with asking both Andy and Nandini to introduce themselves, and then we'll take it from there. Andy?
Thank you, Rima. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Tsao. I'm a managing director at Silicon Valley Bank and head of a business that we call our Global Gateway, and I'll explain what that is in just a minute. But for those of you who are not familiar with Silicon Valley Bank, we are the leading commercial bank in the US that's focused exclusively on the tech and innovation sectors. And we work with companies really when they begin to raise external capital at sort of significant angel and seed level. And then we have specialized teams that then work with them at Series A and beyond, and up to the multinational level, really to infinity. We in the US bank approximately more than 50% of the venture-backed technology companies. And in terms of the venture capitalists that support those companies, we probably work with more than 60% of those. As the technology industry is globalizing, so too is Silicon Valley Bank. And today we have, outside of 30 offices across the US, we have operations in the UK, in Israel, and in China. We've announced that we're opening offices in Germany and Canada for next year. And my team, the Global Gateway, is looking at new emerging technology hubs around the world where we don't have physical infrastructure. That includes India. So we're very excited to be back in India again. And Rima, as you suggest, while Silicon Valley still is a leading technology hub, we're very excited about what's happening here in other hubs around the world as technology really is democratizing to some degree. Again, we're working with investors and entrepreneurs around the world, and it's great to be with you here today.
Thanks, Rima. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. So first of all, it's such an honor and privilege to be here this morning. Being an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, nothing makes us happier than to be with kindred spirits in any part of the world. But to come to Hyderabad, which has been working so hard and has done such an amazing job to focus on incubators and innovation and entrepreneurship, it's a real privilege. And this is my 3rd time as a delegate for a Global Entrepreneurship Summit. I was first time in Turkey, then in Dubai, and being an Indian American, you can well imagine my passion for coming back here, for especially having a Global Entrepreneurship Summit in India, but that is made that much more special with the theme being Women First and Prosperity for All. I, of course, have a lot of respect for my fellow male colleagues in the industry. I owe a lot to have learned from them, but at the end of it, I think Rima and I will concur, and I think Andy would too, that it would be that much more exciting with more participation from both sides, from both the genders. So this is very exciting. And I feel very grateful that they want the global resources to get convened on this. And I think it's against that backdrop that I would like to share that as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, I opened the office for Royal Bank of Canada in San Francisco. So I'm very used to cross-border investing, and I really enjoy cross-border investing. I think the whole theme of globalization allows us to leverage and also bring the best of minds from the outside. And after that, I opened the office for MDS Capital in Palo Alto, where I managed, it was a $1.2 billion fund. So I'm more used to divesting larger sums of money, but I have worked from seed to VC. And Rima, with whom we had the pleasure of interacting earlier, was mentioning that the forum today is the entire range. So I'm looking forward to sharing my journey with you. And at this juncture, I've gone on my own. So it's very, very exciting. It was amazing being at RBC Capital and MDS. But being on your own and again being an entrepreneur is very exciting. And I'm the founder and CEO of Tenacity Global Group, Inc. We're at a very entrepreneurial stage. We have been very cognizant of looking at the opportunities in India that will allow us to leverage the best of Silicon Valley and best of India. And I'm looking forward to learning more from Rima and also from all of you as to where you are focusing and how we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from Ankur Capital. I'm a co-founder of Ankur Capital. Ritu Verma, who's also a speaker at this conference. Both of us started Ankur Capital a couple of years back. Our focus is early stage investing in core infrastructure sectors in India, which is agriculture, health, and education. These three are pretty under-invested, one. And also in terms of the penetration and digitization is fairly low in these sectors. And that's the reason we started these Ankur Capital a couple of years back. Our focus is very, very early stage, right, as opposed to both of you. So while I'm supposed to be the moderator, I might put in the hat of a panelist at times, because in order to bring in the perspective of early stage investing and the India part of it. Right. I would start off with Andy. Your fund your bank has invested both in India as well as across the globe, right? What stage do you see Indian companies availing of your bank's services fund versus what do you see across the world? Is there what stage do they approach? And what do you see as the maturity of the organization as well? Do you see any differences when they approach? Do you make any differences? Or similarities, both?
Absolutely. So we first started coming to India back at really the turn of the millennia, back in the early 2000s. I think some folks may recall that we took a delegation from the Silicon Valley back at around 2002 or 3 timeframe, and I think we brought some of the leading venture capitalists along with us to spend a week here in the ecosystem. I think it was shortly thereafter that we established our direct presence, but on that trip, many of those firms, Sequoia, Mayfield, Excel, et cetera, began to set up their operations alongside ours at that time frame. So we were very excited about the opportunity in India. I think in the early days that the market was relatively nascent, obviously a huge opportunity, but the venture capital ecosystem was relatively small and again, sort of learning and nascent. I think there's been an incredible evolution over the last decade or more. Over that period of time, we established a non-bank financial corporation that we were providing venture debt for some of the entrepreneurs in the room. You may be familiar with venture debt. That's a tool that's very commonly used in the US for entrepreneurs. As you raise venture capital, Series A typically, you're able to then get a loan from specialist lenders like Silicon Valley Bank to augment the equity that you've raised. And for entrepreneurs, obviously, that means it's not dilutive financing. You don't have to give away a piece of your business to get that financing. So it's sort of attractive for the entrepreneur. And the investors like it too, right? Because it brings more capital into the business. And so we were engaged in that up until 2015 here in India. I believe we had about a portfolio of about 50 companies, and 50. That business today is known as Innoven for the local Indian entrepreneurs who may be familiar with that organization. They're one of the leading venture debt providers here in India today. But again, we saw many exciting businesses being developed over that period of time. I guess the other reflection that I have is that in 2015, here in India, I think it was very similar to what was happening in the US. I think if you remember, that was probably the peak of the unicorn phenomenon. And I know here in India with businesses like Flipkart, that you had the same enthusiasm, shall we say, or maybe over-enthusiasm for these large consumer businesses. And so some really valuable businesses were built and are still around from that period of time. But what we're seeing today is a slight shift for India in terms of where the investors are putting their money. And because those consumer businesses are inherently very capital-intensive businesses. And so we're seeing today investors shifting a bit more to SaaS businesses or enterprise software. And those businesses by nature tend to be more global because they're looking at global markets. And therefore, they're looking at the US market because we are, of course, one of the largest economies in the world. So to answer your question, Rima, we are seeing increasing amounts of Indian entrepreneurs as they look towards the US for market entry. Typically, I would say they've already raised some initial capital here in India because there is now a pretty well-developed venture capital ecosystem. And they're coming to the US for that next stage of growth and development. And that's something we hope to be able to help with at Silicon Valley Bank.
So it's the fact that what is the difference between the average ticket size that you do in the US versus what you had done in India? And at what stage do you see in India, very early stage, Series A companies coming to you versus, because the Series A in India is typically even $1 million to $2 million becomes a Series A. And do you see companies at that stage approaching you, and versus what's your experience in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a very good point, which is when calibrating for the rest of the world versus Silicon Valley. So in general, although we can get into sort of what some of the trends are in the Silicon Valley, because I think there's so much liquidity that companies have to be a little further along to raise capital in general. But here in India, in other emerging markets or new developing markets, that generally, as you suggest, Series A are smaller than the Silicon Valley, and companies need to be further along. So revenue phase already well beyond proof of concept, beginning to scale up. Whereas in the Silicon Valley, you're still able to, in many cases, raise Series A at very early revenue or pre-revenue stage. So that's certainly a difference. Ticket sizes, again, in the US are going to be larger. Right now, you're in a market where there's so much liquidity in the market, and the venture capital industry has raised, last year was a record fundraising year for the US venture capital industry. This year, in terms of money invested, we're looking at the last 2 quarters, we've invested $20 billion per quarter, so we're at another we're on track to raise around $80 billion invested in the venture capital industry, which again puts it on par with 2015. And by the way, 2015 was the most amount invested at $80 billion since the dot-com era back in 2000, 99, 2000. So there's a lot of liquidity coming into the market. And generally what we're seeing is that the investors are writing bigger checks because they do have more liquidity. They're waiting for companies to demonstrate that they're breaking out. And at the seed and early stage levels, there are so many terrific accelerators such as Y Combinator or Techstars, et cetera, that even the seed investors are now waiting for those companies to scale up a little bit more. So as some of my colleagues there will, we typically say today that kind of seed is the new Series A, right? That's kind of what the Valley is operating a little bit like today. I know that's different in India. I think the amount of capital is obviously not the same. There's less, so the rounds tend to be smaller. They're more efficient in terms of the use of that capital. So again, a long way of answering your question, we do see Series A Indian entrepreneurs coming to us. They're engaging with us about the early discussions around market expansion. And that's when we like to get involved. It's sort of that, how can we help? How can we help expand our network on your behalf to help you enter the US market a little bit more efficiently? So we do see Series A Indian entrepreneurs, although we can do more for companies, obviously, that are more of at a scale-up stage.
Anthony, from a healthcare sector, since you have a lot of experience in the healthcare sector, and you have been lately looking at the Indian startup system, Indian venture capital system, industry as well, can you share your experience of what do you see in the seed stage difference between what you've seen in the rest of the world and in India? And especially because you have been involved with Israel as well. So could you share some experiences of how do you see those?
Thank you. So first of all, I wanted to make a pitch for Silicon Valley Bank. In several of my investments, Silicon Valley Bank was there supporting our CEOs, and you guys have been amazing to work with. So any of you all who are looking to have the kind of bank who understands an entrepreneur and understands the rhythm and also is looking for smart, intelligent money, which comes with experience, you'll be well served getting Andy's card.
Very kind words.
No,
now I'm going to have to buy you a drink later.
You have to. And we just found out we live up the road from each other, so I think I'm going to lean on that more. But I genuinely meant it, because it's so important for an entrepreneur when you go out there to look for money, to have the kind of institutions that A, understand your struggle, and B, can mentor you along. And there are so many different kinds of mentoring that are required, the technical, the scaffolding that needs to be built. But one of the core is obviously finance, and that's where Silicon Valley Bank has got it in spades. So coming back to Rima's question, and I thank you for juxtaposing India and Israel. If you don't mind, I'll also throw in Canada. Might as well make it more interesting. So in the case of the biotech, medtech, healthcare, that's the area that I look at. The biotech, as you know, was spawned in the Bay Area. So not only is it home for Silicon Valley, biotech is actually got started with Stanford and Genentech, and I am a product of Chiron. So Genentech, Chiron, Amgen are the three major pillars of the biotech industry. And so the whole Bay Area is very, very ripe in early stage research that allows and makes itself amenable to early seed and Series A financing. And we have excellent institutions like the Golden, right, the Golden Seeds. We have the whole host of investors who are there for seed and Series A, because especially in biotech, medtech, the early stage requires that the research is of a certain quality, because, you know, it's a long haul. As far as Israel is concerned, they are outstanding also. So we, oh, fantastic. I love being in Israel. The energy of Israel is incredible, bar none. And their quality of research is outstanding. And I was very fortunate to be invited to by Hadassah Institute's Dr. Chaim Lothan for the first Biotech MedTech conference coming together, and I went to Weizmann Institute. So once again, the research quality is very high there. India also has excellent research, just as Canada, but the density is very different in biotech, medtech, right? So that makes a huge difference. Bay Area is huge. We also have the Boston area. And obviously, whenever you have major universities coming together, like in the case of Silicon Valley, we have Stanford, which is huge in medicine and lends itself to biotech, medtech, UCSF, which is #1 clinically, and then you have UC Berkeley, which is very, very strong also in the fundamental science and also engineering component, which, as you know, more and more biotech, medtech is having the amalgamation going on. So from a perspective of somebody who's looking to invest, the opportunities are a lot larger in Bay Area and Israel, and then Canada is very productive also. In the case of India, what we find is that we need to wait a little longer from the early stage research to figure out if this is going to be in the right direction or not. I just wanted to be honest, Rima. So as a result, the ecosystem is built around in the biotech, medtech is a lot less dense as it is in other areas.
So interesting because, in India, one is that the university ecosystem is not that well developed. There are just a few of them is one
I
thing.
think that's a very fair point.
And there is also couple of the government of India agencies, like BIRAC, for example, has been very active in the biotechnology area. However, one of the key things has been that both in the BIRAC or the Indian university system, the amount of capital available is very, very less.
Yes, it's very true.
I know you put it across as saying that we are being capital efficient. But I will actually raise it the other way around, that are we underinvested? So what happens is the fact that because you are underinvested, your product is not mature enough to attract capital.
Right.
So it brings us a fact that in certain segments, like if you're talking of the healthcare, ones which require research, is the seed and VC capital the right place, or is it actually grant-led capital that needs to get stronger? Could be universities which are indirectly funded by the industries, could be wherever. Is that the reason why India is still lagging behind in this segment? Because we as seed investors come across many companies, interesting ideas. But two things that stand out. One is that they are underinvested in the research stage, so they are not mature enough. Second is that the collaboration to the point that you made about the fact that mentoring and marketing and the other things that's needed, that that pairing of the business and the idea and the research doesn't come together. Now, these two have been very, very significant drawbacks for real IP-led products to come into the market.
I couldn't concur more. I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
And I think, Rima, as you can appreciate, both of us being in the same space, and Andy sitting in the Bay Area, where, as we were saying, this has all got spawned. I think it's a lot more complex in our field because we know starting out that it's a long haul. You don't have a 6-month product turnaround cycle, right? And secondly, what works in a rat does not necessarily work in a human. We all know that. Otherwise, we have a lot of cancer-free rats running around. So the complication is there. And the grant money becomes critically important. In fact, in Israel, the Bird Capital is very supportive of the early stage. And in America, the grant capital is so rife. And even Canada, you have that. So I think I would very much agree with you that we are at that juncture when I'm looking at India. We were all there yesterday and day before. What is very exciting is that Prime Minister Modi and several of the speakers in India have been saying that the future is, for India's economic development, rests with the entrepreneurs. Because we have so many young, vibrant people that we must do that. And I think from that perspective, from looking out and problem solving, I think you make a very good point that the private and public sector coming together and ensuring there's enough monies early on will be helpful. I would also add one more thing, and I hope you will take it the right way. I think at the end of the day, especially in research, it's very important, just like in the case of venture capital, it's very important to have an ecosystem that allows you to fail. In the case of research, it's very important for you to have an ecosystem where you can stand up and say to your research director, no, I disagree with you entirely. And I have spent X number of hours in the lab, and my gut feeling is that this is right and what you're saying is wrong. And I think that is also a very important component
True.
Right?
Very interesting, ma'am.
So
That's
that's
a point,
also-
yeah.
yes.
It's true. Yeah. So one, I do see is the fact. So would you then suggest that till the time that the ecosystem gets stronger out here, how do you think that some of the companies which are IP focused,
Yes.
how can there be more collaboration
Right.
between different geographies to bring in that capital
Right.
that's needed?
So, I think that's a very, very important question because we all know that at the end of the day, while we think globally, we have to act locally. And the entrepreneurial community in India will be best served if they're looking at their local problems and trying to figure those out. And if they are looking at financial structures and an ecosystem, collaboration is one very, very important mechanism. But also, I think what is very important is, especially when we're dealing with universities, and I think, Andy, you can also weigh in out here, what we are very reticent is that faculty sometimes, in their enthusiasm, will go to a workshop and they'll have a poster session and they'll think nothing of it in their enthusiasm to share something. And then when we are dealing with the attorneys, we find out that it basically has wiped out the intellectual property regime there, right? So, so from that perspective, I think it's also very important, since we are so intellectual property dependent, that there should not only be a stream of collaboration in research, which allows to have a more, in some ways, brings more rigor and allows you to have that freedom, but it also, we need to have another vertical that allows you to be trained very early on, that you don't release the information till the patent is taken care of. And I was wondering, Andy, what do you think of that?
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. I think as you look at very mature ecosystems like the Silicon Valley as an example, really specialized service providers, lawyers, for example, that their focus 100% of the time is working with startup companies, IP-driven companies. And so setting up your company properly from the get-go is much, much better and worth the perhaps additional cost at the outset than finding yourself down the road having made some poor mistakes, whether it relates to the intellectual property, patents, etc., or just simple corporate structure in terms of the way the investors would like to see how the company is set up. That's very important. I know in India that is growing. We certainly know of some firms that do a really good job of that. So certainly for the early stage entrepreneurs in the room, I would advise that the cheapest attorney is not often the best attorney. Make sure you're getting good advice from people that have good experience around the sector. If you don't mind, Nandini, just adding back to Rima's question on capital flows, I think something interesting is happening with India, not only in terms of the money that's come from the US historically, you see all the US branded firms here, but in recent years, you now have money coming from China to India, so I think Ola Cabs is probably a great example of money coming from, whether it's from Didi or SoftBank, I guess Asia really, as a big investor behind that business. So I think very interesting in seeing the very abundant capital now in China beginning to make its way to India. And of course, the multilateral organizations like the IFC, World Bank, very active funders here in India. And I guess the last thing I would say is the very interesting connection that's beginning to build between India and Southeast Asia. So one of my colleagues here, Bo Hansen, is spending his time in Singapore and Indonesia, Malaysia, and we're seeing India capital flows coming from Indian venture capital funds investing in that region.
Rima, I just want to finish one thought here. So India's strength is we have exceptional educational system, and we have very disciplined students and very committed faculty. So that is the cornerstone, and as you said, when we are looking at this South Asia, in some ways it's competition also. But I think if we add these different thought processes, and where we are looking at patent early on, at the university level, I think that's what I wanted to convey. That not only should they be, the research ecosystem should be looked at, but also adding, because Stanford has done a brilliant job of having, for lack of a better word, a business development built inside, in-house, that is. And then the other thing that I just also wanted to share is that please lean on corporate VCs early on. For example, a Novartis, or a Roche, or a Genentech, or if you're in MedTech, then you're a Medtronic, because they will also bring loads of experience, they will help you with your patent, and they'll be also to be one of the syndicate member that then allows you to go to the next level.
Brought to an interesting point, which is that one is that, like you mentioned, that's a lot of money coming into the ecosystem at different stages. And especially at very early stages, it's almost like a badge of honor. You find that any professional wants to say that I'm also an angel investor, right? So that's bringing in a lot of money at the very early stages, and that's happening in India as well, right? However, that there's still a serious gap which is between the mentoring and marketing part of it. Right? So what happens is the fact that seed stage to the growth stage jump that has to take place doesn't happen. Right? And you brought in the part of the fact that when you talk to corporate VCs, you do get to know what is expected. Right. So at a generic level, what would you state that, because there are plenty of very early stage companies in India, but the ones that are going to the next stage are still struggling. It'd be good to know, what do you think that they should work on? And what do you see for in these companies before you put in the next round of capital? Both of you, if you could share your thoughts.
Right.
And,
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we are having these very fundamental conversations is what is so fundamentally required is, because, venture capital in itself is a very risk. We take high risk, high returns, but at the end of the day, let's face it, I'm sure Andy will also say that it can be very risk aversive also. So,
because
right?
Actually the next question that I wanted to ask him was that I don't think that Silicon Valley Bank would invest into companies that are still considered risky in India.
So that's what I'm
versus, across the two geographies itself, do you have different standards?
Right, exactly. So the thing that I think it's very important for us to take home is that whatever you can do to reduce the risk, because intrinsically, there's risk built in when you're an entrepreneur doing anything. Obviously, you're doing something that is uncharted water. So obviously, there's risk there. So that is why what we're trying to say is, whatever you can do, what is in your domain to control, if you can reduce the risk, then you attract the capital much faster, because time has to be on your side. And as an entrepreneur, if you don't have time on your side, then you either have to give up on your dream, or you have to compromise, or somebody else runs with your idea. So there are too many hurdles. So it's very important that when you're starting as an entrepreneur, you have the tools, you have the mentors that tell you how to increase the amount of time you have on your side, how do you reduce the risk the most, because we really want India to flourish. So we want this ecosystem to be seen very savvy like the Israeli ecosystem. We would never think twice that the scientist in Israel has not looked into the patent position, right? Doesn't have access to the networking to corporate VCs, or does not have access to appropriate banks. So we really want the ecosystem around you to be so strong that you're well served, so that we can happily put money, as Andy was saying. There's so much money, and we want to put it in. but we need to have that assurance. Is that, Rima, does that answer your question?
I think it does. So I think you put, instead of, I think the fact that you do the reduced risk kind of encompasses everything that goes into it. I think that's a very well made point. Just like to take that question to you, is the fact that in terms of risk taking into early stage enterprises, especially at, for, you know, what's been your experience in India and other places?
Yeah, and maybe I could speak a little bit generically to that, but certainly it would apply to the lens of Silicon Valley Bank as well. But, you know, we can talk about sort of risk averse versus, you know, risk taking, but generally venture capital is, there's a lot of risk to it anyway, especially early stage venture capital. So speaking from the perspective of international investors who are looking to potentially fund a entrepreneur here in India, generally the trends you'll find, and by the way, this applies to other markets we're spending time in, like Brazil or Mexico or Turkey, for example, you'll find that the global cadre of strong investors in the US who are considering these investments, that they're not going to want to take early stage venture capital risk in a market that is, well, in India, 11.5 hour time zone difference and many thousands of miles away from home. That being said, they will begin to take that risk when those companies have achieved a certain size and scale, typically at the growth stage, and the money coming in from the US or international investment community can be used to really help scale and globalize. And by the way, that's the experience that those investors can bring to the table. So yes, I think there is understanding, whether it's Silicon Valley Bank or the international investment community, that there is an awful lot of risk at the early stage here in India. But once those companies have really shown strong scale-up capability, that you'll find investors that are willing to take that risk at that stage.
That's pretty. So before we open the question to the audience, I want one important thing is the fact that you were a minority, as well as in the professional career as well, as a VC as well. You were a woman. How did you go about building your career to where you are today, where you have been able to set up a $1.2 billion fund? I'm sure that didn't come as a check from somebody, right? You had to work towards that. So what would your experience be? Can you share something around that?
So obviously I'm an exceptional company. Look at Rima, look at Andy, look at myself. We are all minorities in not only in our fields, but also in the geographical locale that we are sitting in. And in my case, a double minority in venture capital. We have less than 2% women and maybe 0.002% women who are not of my type. So I would say in many ways it helped me tremendously that I was not that conscious of the fact that I'm a double minority. It really helped me. It's when people started telling me that you're a double minority and that you know, it's interesting that you've done that, I kind of looked at myself slightly differently. Yeah, you're right, I am a double minority. But till then, I was kind of clueless. Because you're so involved and so passionate in what you're doing, it becomes, you're not thinking in that way. But I think on a very serious note, Rima, being lucky is obviously better than anything. But what really, the women have a lot more struggle, I'll be honest with you. Primarily because, especially in the tech world, and my PhD is in biochemistry and I have a global patent in semiconductor, so I obviously come from a world where technology is important. I think what I have found is the reason that I am here is because I've had amazing, amazing, amazing mentors. And not one, multiple of them. At every stage in my career, I have had incredible mentors, mostly men, and some women, just because the nature of the beast is that we have so many more men, right? And I will say the one defining thing that has helped me is having the kind of people who have taken the time out of the generosity of their spirit to ensure that they would allow me to fail in an environment, but they would help me such that I would minimize my ability to fail and maximize my ability to go forward. The other thing is something that we can all relate, is at the end of the day, your most profound, most significant mentor is your mother. And I am very lucky, as all of us are, in having a mentor who looked at me and basically instilled in me that it really doesn't matter where I'm coming from or who I am. It really matters where I want to go and how much I'm willing to work hard for that. And one more thing I'll definitely like to add, Rima, that it makes a huge difference if you're part of a network that is collegiate. Having gone to an all-girls school, an all-women's college, I always have looked at women as my buddies, as my colleagues. I never looked at them as competition. And I think it made a big difference because every now and then I'll get a phone call from a woman colleague, few that they are in number, that I'd like for you to participate. Of course, men colleagues have been exceptionally supportive, but it also was very good to have this kind of a ecosystem where you could lean on, as Sheryl Sandberg has said, you need to have that. And you cannot underestimate that, and I like to make a pitch for that also.
Did you ever face, or did you ever feel that, as a minority, did you have to do twice as good as the others, or you didn't have to?
I think, as Nandi was saying, that I've been fortunate in my career also to have some strong mentors that have taken the time to share their wisdom and experience with me. Also, I've been fortunate to work at an organization just over 20 years now at Silicon Valley Bank that really has a strong culture of and values around diversity and inclusion. And part of the reason why my career has extended as long as it has at the bank is because of those values. And I think there's so much awareness today around the notion of diversity and inclusion in the Bay Area. And I think you can feel it in the air when you read the papers or listen to the TV news, that change seems to be in the air right now. And I'm just very, very hopeful that we'll continue to make progress on this issue. And I think we're in a funny time in the world right now where things go forward and backwards, but very, very hopeful that we'll continue to make good progress on this front. And I'd never thought about the notion that John Chambers made in the opening plenary sessions, which is just the simple notion of how much growth in our economy that we can have, GDP growth, simply by empowering women more actively into the workforce. That's not so simple notion, but that notion, how much we can gain as a society, not only in terms of norms and values, but also from an economic perspective.
Can I just add one thought to that? And I had goosebumps when Ms. Ivanka Trump said in her plenary session that if women are allowed, supported, and they enter the mainstream, then they would contribute to the economy of China and India combined, which is huge. And I of course, being the mother of an only child who happens to be a boy, of course I am very grateful for all my male mentors. I'll mentor men and boys and all of that. But my heart does go out to women because we have to take on responsibilities above and beyond the work. And in order for the society to be successful in a holistic manner, we cannot ever sacrifice being a good mother also. And as a result, it becomes important that we have that ecosystem. And I think that is why this platform is so important, that if we support women in a much more meaningful way in the workforce, whether they are entrepreneurs or they're VCs or whatever they choose to be, then we'll have that. Also, whenever you allow me, Rima, I'd like to talk about the balancing the equation under the Silicon Valley India Initiative, but I'll leave it to you.
So we have 15 minutes. We'll first open it to questions and then wrap up.
Sorry, a portable what?
A portable soothing mat that calms crying babies by mimicking the constant motion and sound that they experience in the womb.
You know, I'm sorry, you know,
voice
there's-
is echoing.
the acoustics here is not good.
All right.
We really want to know what you worked on, so that's why.
A portable soothing mat that calms crying babies by mimicking the constant motion
wonderful.
and sound that they experience in the womb. And I'm currently, this year we're set to do about 1.4 million in sales. We aired on Shark Tank
Congratulations.
Thank you. Earlier this year. And we're officially doing Seed Series raising. And I feel like as a woman, I'm on an uphill battle as a female trying to raise because of the statistics. So I was wondering if you had any particular insights or experience or maybe some kind of unique financing opportunities that as a woman I could take advantage of.
Is it okay, Rima, if I take, yes. So first of all, I applaud you for doing something that is so critically important, and congratulations. Yes, there are several institutions that are geared specifically for women. And what I will do is, if it's okay with you, I will pass on even more information to Rima, and then she can disseminate, like Golden Seeds or angel investors, which are specifically geared for women. I think that will be help you if you get started there. And then there are grants that are kept for women. And then I don't know if you're an American, so then you also have the Small Business Administration, which specifically is looking to help women, especially at your stage. So that would be very helpful.
There's another organization I'd recommend called ASTIA, ASTIA.org.
Yes, Astria, that's right.
Support women
Yeah.
entrepreneurs.
And there's Halo Ventures, like the Angel Halo. And the person who is very actively involved, she's a friend of mine, so I'll be happy to make that introduction.
Hi, my name is Helen. Can you hear me? Echo? Okay. I would love some practical advice from the three of you in terms of raising capital when you're in an early stage startup, like myself and many others in the room. We're in that in-between stage where we don't have user acquisition and traction yet, but we can't get there without investment either. It's kind of that what came first, the chicken or the egg question. So I would love practical advice on how to approach investors when you're in that hard stage without much to show, but you need funds to get there.
I'll be happy to, but I can wait either way.
Do you want to start?
Okay, yeah, I'll start. So I think it's very important at that juncture where you are right now for you to find those investors who understand that this has not been baked and not concretized, right? But they are driven by the idea and the impact your idea is going to have. That is critically important because at the end of the day, the investor realizes that if this was already done, this would be a mature industry. So that is not a problem. But what you need to do is you need to focus on the probability of success and what you are doing to make that happen and the impact that's going to happen. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
I would just add that it sounds like you're at the stage where you're kind of looking for probably angel investment, I'm guessing. And so, let me delineate between the idea of kind of smart money and money. Now, at the end of the day, you need to fund your business. So oftentimes, the first source of funding comes from angels that end up being what they call friends, family, and fools, that sort of group, and people that really believe in you and your idea, right? But then beyond that, if you can demonstrate whether it's the idea or even better, a little bit of proof of concept, something that shows some uptake in the idea that you have, then I think you can start looking towards that smart money, investors, as Nandini was hinting at, which are people that can really help you build your business because they have that expertise in your space. And with all...
They can see it, right? They can connect the dots. I just want to say one more thing, if I may, Rima. please, this is something to every entrepreneur in the room. Please, please, please do your homework.
There's so much information
You
out
know,
there today.
at the end of the day, it's about connecting the dots and pattern recognition in anything, whether it's language, it's math, music, whatever. Finding the investor, whether they're labeled as seed or angel or mom and pop or VC or whatever, it's about finding those people who are going to believe in your story because they understand it. It's very difficult for us to invest in something that we don't know because it's such high risk. Please do your homework. It's well worth your time to find those few people who are capable of understanding your story and they're capable of taking your trajectory forward than just wasting your time just because you're passionate. Would that be fair, Andy and Rima?
Absolutely. I think that at that stage, it's you that they have to invest in. Right. So you've got to have that confidence.
Thank you.
Maybe we should have a gender diversity. Okay? Or between both of you, maybe. One after the other. Quick. Yep. Could you hold the mic a bit far away? Because when you have it closer, it... Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Is this better? Yeah.
I hope so.
My name is Tarun. I run a startup in the education space. So we connect students and tutors through our mobile app. So people can hire maths tutors, science tutors, guitar tutors through our app. Okay. So in general, what we have found is that in the education space, it's a lot harder to raise and go from seed to VC, especially in India. So do you find similar trends outside of India? And why do you think it's the case in the education sector? Why do you think people struggle from seed to VC? Thank you.
Sure. I think, needless to say, we all know how important education is, but it has not been served well for decades. So this is no new information, right? Correct. So I would rather spend my time figuring out what the solution is than trying to figure out what the problem is here. Because the problems are pretty complex. Yeah. So my suggestion would be that education also comes in different buckets. So let's say if I'm doing education in STEM, or I'm doing education in music, or education in XYZ, once again, going back to what we were saying earlier, the onus is on you to find the investor who knows your space. Because you cannot get anybody excited about your space unless they are already excited. The probability is a lot lower, right? So instead of looking at education generically, I would look at a couple of things. One, education, what specific space. So let's say it's education in aerospace. Then you know right away whom to go to, right? Secondly, I would look at what kind of impact this is going to have, which then allows you to maybe create a private-public partnership of getting money, because the public sector, especially with Prime Minister Modi, is very committed to helping in education, right? And thirdly, I would also try to suggest that you build bridges with collateral ecosystems so you increase your probability of success rather than just staying in your silo.
Just quickly adding that I think this EdTech phenomenon is not, it's not just India that you're describing. Right. This is a phenomenon. There's great opportunity in a lot of, whether developed or emerging markets for EdTech. I think some of the underlying issues for investors is there haven't been that many big exits in the space. So maybe as you build your business, thinking through, how do you get to that path of exit? How are you going to generate that financial return at the end of the day? Might be useful to as you try to attract investment.
Can I just add one more thing? Sharpen your pencil about your business model.
Basically, you need to know who's the customer who's going to pay for it.
Yeah. Right.
Get to that.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think this lady in orange.
So there's a lady there's a guy standing. Yep.
How's it going? Similarly, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I own an EdTech company as well. And I am also a new Silicon Valley banker guy. I met a guy named Anthony Rowley. Yeah, so I'm excited to join the family. And to your presentation, I have a question about a strategy between raising funds on the equity side with debt. And as I'm talking to investors, they tend not to like debt. But I think they don't like it because of liquidation preferences, right? If something happens, we actually have to pay the bankers back before we pay the investors back. So my question is, do you have any practical strategies for companies who don't want to play the alphabet game? And the alphabet game is what I call raising Series A, B, C, which I think places us more along a financial product than an ongoing business. And what I'm trying to do is develop an investment strategy that does take some early capital from investors, but makes them more long-term partners, and then has like series of debts, pay debt back, build credit, and sort of have a continuation there. And for you in Silicon Valley Bank, what's your threshold? So if we do raise an angel or a seed round, what then is your threshold?
So maybe what I'd do is the fact there's one point that you raised, which was about debt and equity. And it's perhaps a good question to answer because in India, for example, nobody likes to take debt. Especially at early stage, it's zero. There's no way. So, you know, the good question of how would investors and entrepreneurs
This
react
has got
to debt.
Andy written all over it.
I'll try to keep this brief, but I'm happy to chat after we're done a little more detail on your situation.
But maybe at a generic level, it would be good for everyone to hear that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a lot of great points in that, you know, entrepreneurship is not just about staged financing the way that we're really accustomed to talking about the alphabet game, as you put it. There are many great businesses that have been bootstrapped or funded in very creative ways. And the good news is today you have more ways to fund your business than ever, whether it's crowdfunding or now you have the ICOs that are, who knows where that's going, but there's a lot of money coming into the market. As far as debt goes, you know, historically banks have been pretty challenged to provide funding for early stage companies. And it's the conventional view on credit. You need to understand where the cash flows are coming from to repay your loan. So you really do need to look at specialist lenders who might like us, that have a good understanding of your situation. Again, companies like you who haven't necessarily raised a lot of money yet, it would be looking at what kind of assets have you generated, like receivables or account debtors that potentially that we can lend against. Obviously, things like the Small Business Administration also have different sort of loan programs for folks that aren't looking to raise staged financing. They might require personal guarantees and that kind of thing. So it's a very different kind of game, but a way to potentially get debt financing. I'll conclude just by saying that as far as venture debt goes, traditional venture debt, it's typically, you have to have the Series A into the mix, and then the historical guidelines have been about 20 to 30% of that funding round you can borrow in addition. In India, it's a little bit less than that, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have 5 minutes, I think, right? I mean, so I need to... Okay. And then after that, the gentleman in front. Yep, could you quickly...
Hi. Thank you for letting me ask. So what does it critically take for a business doing dairy alternatives, dairy alternative foods? It is a fast emerging market. To attract seed funding, the critical point is...
Sorry, I didn't get what? What industry, what did you say?
What does it critically take for a business doing dairy alternatives, which is a fast emerging market, to attract seed funding, the very basic level of funding? Dairy alternatives, so vegan products.
Oh, vegan products, okay.
Yeah. So vegan ice creams, vegan yogurts.
So, but that's specific to an industry, you're saying that.
Yeah.
So I think that's perhaps a question that you should
Can
take.
I just have one thought? You know, Whole Foods has just been acquired by Amazon. They're big into vegan.
Yeah.
So
reach them.
Yeah, so I mean, is there any merit in looking for foreign investment since it's a concept more maturely prevalent, perceived in US?
It's everywhere. Actually, it's as long as you can define who your customer is. So there are a couple of things that you would need to define who your customer is, how are you going to brand, and how are you going to ultimately get them to buy it. So it might have to be in terms of getting them across.
Yeah.
And then get the investors who would be willing to bet that. There are enough and more investors who are now looking at alternate foods.
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. You'll have to do your homework as to who.
There are enough and
And work backwards, right, Rima? Right, Andy? Yes. Do your homework and work backwards.
Yeah. So our sales have already been doubling year on year.
It's not about sales. It's not absolute numbers, but the concept and the proof. Where she said it's in terms of the biggest thing that you brought up was reduced risk, right? So who as the investor wants to know is the fact at what stage you are in the money that they're putting in, there's a customer who's going to buy that.
Yeah.
I think that part of it, the customer risk or the market risk is what you have to face at that point in time. It's not the absolute value, but the risk.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take that. Yeah. Just one thing as a fact. Are you an entrepreneur? Next time, remember as a fact, if you have to be chosen, you should have just come and stood there, you would have got it. You're fighting among 10 people, you should...
Actually, it would not be a bad idea. I love Rima's idea. If you guys make a line, so instead of wasting time, we can quickly go one after
It
the
would have
other.
been faster.
Right, just come in the center, and if there's a line, then we can, right? What do you say, Rima?
Because we just have a
Yeah,
few
because
minutes.
we are wasting...
Quickly, yeah.
Why don't we, the people who have questions, Rima, what do you think? If they just came in the center and stood there, we'll go one after the other.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for your participation. It was great and I am learning a lot. My question is mostly, do you hear me well?
Yes, please carry on.
My question is mostly about emerging markets. You talk about the big potential in India in terms of startups and exits. I am from Panama, from Latin America, and my question is, as you as investors, as Silicon Valley Bank, and you as a particular investor, do you have any plans or what's your perspective about the emerging markets in Latin America? Because all
I get the question. What's the perspective on emerging markets, right?
Exactly.
So first of all, huge. There's a lot of different institutions that are working on emerging markets. All you have to do is Google emerging market investors, and there are boatloads of them. So you would be in very good situation. There's a lot of light that is being thrown. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
A quick and dirty answer so that we could, right?
There are lots of investors.
A lot of investors, specifically for emerging markets.
And just LATAM specific, we've been calling on Latin America for more than 5 years now, mostly the bigger markets, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina. I think Panama is relatively new and a small market, so you'll probably have to look for investors that are more regional in their focus. But we're very enthusiastic about that market.
But there is there. You won't have a problem finding them.
Hi, my name is Emerald. I live in Dublin, and I'm a privacy lawyer, and I help companies comply with the rather strict European data protection laws. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. There's a very significant change happening, and the main thing is that their laws apply globally. And what I'm wondering is, at what stage of your investment, because I'm kind of trying to target medium-sized companies, at what stage of an investment cycle does regulatory compliance become an issue?
I think it's industry-based in many ways also, and it's pretty early on to risk mitigation. But
Absolutely. I think it'd be part of any standard due diligence that a professional investor would be, the institutional investor.
Any institutional investor.
And are you currently looking at the bigger changes in European law? Because I heard an awful lot about risk and an awful lot about pretty much every place except Europe.
Absolutely, I think that's a very fair question. We're all looking at how the dust is settling. So you have a huge opportunity there.
Yes, and I'm aware. I'm trying to do my best to make the most of it.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Roger Zondi. My question is about your introduction of seed funds to venture capital in French countries, mostly in sub-Saharan countries. What are the difficulties for you not to come to sub-Saharan countries? As you see, in these countries like Burkina Faso, we didn't have any seed found that can
Rima, I can
so
answer
in
that
the
very quickly.
yeah.
So there has been in the last decade huge amount of focus on Africa, Sub-Sahara, in those areas. So you will find that ecosystem. You should be able to find that ecosystem.
And I just want to add to that.
It's not missing.
It may not. So you need to, initially in any market, it is the development institutions which come in. And there are lots of development institutions, both from US and Europe, who are looking at Africa is the place where they are looking at next.
They're definitely looking at it.
That
And
would
yes.
get, over a period of time, it'll get better.
And the IFCs of the world can also be...
UKA, USA,
yes,
all
whole
of them.
host
And even,
of
you will,
organizations.
So just 2 minutes to say what I'm doing. I don't know if you was at the semi-finalist stage of this competition. I just done my pitch there. We began to make money by selling credit reports, and now we are moving to credit score, and we launch our platform as a P2P lending that use credit score. In this way,
I'm sorry to interrupt here.
Okay.
So,
how
the generic question of your country, I think that would do that. If it's specific to your thing, I think because there are 4 others and we are running out of time.
What is your vision on P2P lending, please?
So I think he did make one thing in the beginning, if you remember, was the fact that there is a movement towards SaaS-based businesses, right? Enterprise. So I think that he'd already made that as a point.
I mean, there are big opportunities in peer-to-peer lending, and we're happy to follow up more offline.
Offline, yeah.
There's a lot of funding going to P2P lending because there's a big potential impact component to that as well for Africa.
So I think that's, yep.
Hi, I'm Sanisha. I run this company called Lean Spoon. We are into nutrition advice and personalized healthy food. So my question was, from an investor standpoint, when you're evaluating a company, how do you prioritize these? Scalability, profitability, and exit options?
You know, you can't have exit unless you have scalability and profitability, right? So I think, would you agree? So they all come in a, they're all important.
Okay.
All 3.
All 3 important, yes. That's what makes it so interesting.
Hi, I run a company for B2B platform space, for automation platform, and we are in the phase of growth phase, like moving into other countries, US specifically. And what are the modalities for going into other countries, US, to basically for growth, for B2B lending, B2B companies in the platform space, automation platform space. And the second thing is, this area is, this sector is actually, all the big companies are in this space as well.
So I got the B2B part, but I didn't get...
Actually B2B platform, automation platform space with SaaS and then automation area. And we are in the phase where we need to grow into other countries, expand as part of the growth phase, and then we have done the basic
I think that's part that you had addressed at the beginning.
There's definitely an increase in that happening. We're seeing a lot of that coming to the US
the modalities, how do we expand into other countries?
Well, offline, once you get off the stage, grab his card.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you finished. Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Daria Mustafina. I came from Ukraine, and my question is, everyone knows that in 2014 we have the revolution of glory, and we showed the world that we can fight for our freedom and democracy. But what we have now, we have the annexation of Crimea by Russian Federation. We have the war on Donbass with Russian Federation. We have devaluation of national currency in 3 times, and our investment attractiveness fall down. So the question is, how do you think, do the world need to support such countries like Ukraine, so countries which are in a conflict right now and have a huge challenges in economy development, because it's not only a business deal, but it's just to become a human and to support the people basically who are fighting for prosperity and development. Thank you very much.
It's challenging. We spent time in both Russia and Ukraine over the last few years, and the political volatility has made it very complicated for international investors. That being said, the multilateral organizations, we keep bringing back IFC, EBRD, those kind of organizations are continuing to fund in Ukraine. And the other alternative is to look for VC funds that are following the Russian-speaking diaspora into other markets, and there are a number of those those investors out there, and they're out there publicly on the web. You can find those funds. But keep at it. It's not easy for sure.
Very empathetic to the challenge. We see where you're coming from, but I think Andy addressed it very well.
And unfortunately, the commercial capital will always not take that kind of risk because you already have a business risk, a huge risk. So adding the political and social risk is not something commercial capital will take it unless they feel that the commercial capital far exceeds the political risk and the upside is very, very high.
Hello, I'm Shivakshi. So my question is that yesterday I met a VC from US who was willing to fund, but the problem was that there were FDA issues that due to which she was not able to proceed on it. So my question is about what are the ways that, because this summit is about strengthening the relationships of US and India. So I do understand that there is a fund coming from public sector, from the government, from the United States, but who is private equity from the US willing to be able to invest in Indian companies here?
Sorry, is the question regarding foreign exchange risk? Is that the question I could hear? So, most entities, just like Rima was saying, you look at socio-political risk of the country, they also look at the foreign exchange risk as a factor. So you build that into it. So it should not be a non-starter. It's just that you should have enough delta that overcomes whatever the foreign exchange risks are. Is that?
So
absolutely. So just
this
to give,
is possible.
So for example, in India, 15% is a normal rate of debt, even if it's a collateralized debt you would have. But in Silicon Valley, nobody pays 15%. Sorry?
6%.
Sub 6%, right? So obviously there is an exchange risk of 9 to 10%. Without, I'm talking of collateralized, right? So that's built into it. So that's a commercial transaction. So, and there is enough and more money a significant amount of money that has come in from the US markets into India.
I think the main thing is, Rima, isn't that it need not be a non-starter. That's the main thing, right?
Otherwise you wouldn't have had, SoftBank is investing so many billions of dollars. So I think that answers. SoftBank is the
exactly.
is a
Rima is exactly right. It's built into the system.
Built into the system.
Right.
Good morning, I'm Sarita and I'm into manufacturing of metal powders. I'm in a stage where I would like to expand the market and build my business. So I would like to know, in India, is there a platform where I could reach out where all the investors are located on one website or one platform?
Probably so there are. Sorry, in fact, there are various sites like Let's Venture. That comes to my mind, but there's a whole lot of angel lists that are there. There are enough and more such
based on series like Seed Capital or?
Yes, all of them have that. Let's Venture comes to the top of my mind, but I'm sure there are other brand names as well that are
Let's Venture.
Okay. Yeah, you could look them up.
I'll keep the question simple so you can answer. I'm Srilekha Pale. I'm coming from Washington, D.C. area, and I'm a hospital administrator there. So I would like to get into the trend of Indian market on emergency management or urgent care concepts or transitional care management, which is fairly a newer concept here. But I guess my question is, should I be focused on big corporate hospitals such as Apollo hospitals, or should I target smaller hospitals to win the pitch? I mean, who do I pitch first for?
I understand the question.
So I guess
specific to her business, she has in certain aspects of transitional care, and that's one word that I heard.
So she's wondering, should she go to a small mom and pop or should she go to Apollo?
Do you have a point of view?
To be very honestly, you want to increase the probability of success, I would go to both and I would explore, and there may be certain facets of what you have to offer is very attractive to Apollo, and there may be certain facets that what you have to offer may be attractive to a smaller hospital. But at every juncture, you should increase the probability of your success.
I guess the only reason I'm asking is if the time is short, because I live in US And if I have to kind of make best use of my time, even though I'm going to pitch to both, where should my investment
So
of
I'm sorry,
time
but
be?
you cannot run a business in India sitting there in the US. At the seed stage, you cannot do that.
Okay. That makes
so
sense.
You have to.
Yeah, and it's a learning
There's no
process.
shortcuts. There's no
Yeah.
shortcuts at all.
Okay.
Find somebody here who's going to work with you.
That's also not easy because at the
Sure.
initial stages, you have to put your heart and soul into it.
Correct. That's precisely I asked the question because I do have the business plan and I need to move forward. So I wanted to understand the time investment and also which sector would be more wise for me to invest in.
But none of the, because if neither of the hospitals will be willing to sign up with you till you have you are here. If you're not going to be here, they wouldn't even talk to you because they would say, the risk is too high for them.
I think we won't do justice to answering your question because we don't have enough details in hand. Would you agree, Rima?
Absolutely.
Right.
But just
I mean,
at a
we
very
can't-
top level.
Yeah, we can't say go this way or that way because it'll be unfair for us to give you wrong advice, right?
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Monique. I'm from Haiti. I have a construction company specialized in building metallic structure buildings. I started my company before 2006, but as you know, in 2011 we had an earthquake. So that's where I started that specialty, if I can say it like that, of building metal structure buildings which are more secure. Now, my company has been very, very successful. In 4 years, I built like 22 metallic structure buildings.
Wonderful.
2, 3, 4 levels, okay? And the problem is that I would like to know if there is a platform where you could find like capital, because construction is a very high demanding capital business. And for example, now I just found a $20 million contract, and I had to sell 70% of my company actions just to have the capital to be able to do that contract. So it's a little bit frustrating. Now, in my case, it's already done, so I cannot come back. But yet, I wanted to know if there is not like a platform where investors could be interested. And during the last 30 years, all the big construction contracts are done by foreign companies in Haiti, like Dominican, American, etc. And there is a potential, local potential. We have the capability of offering much better prices, more competitive. And actually, the contract that I just got, I was in front of foreign companies, so it was really a success for me. But then, once you get the contract, you see that you really have a funding problem, capital problem.
Maybe I think you should answer that question.
Sure. It sounds like your business was on the cusp of the point where you could potentially go to more conventional financiers like banks or potentially infrastructure investors, because this is a traditional industry, right? Construction is very well understood. Banks feel very comfortable with hard assets like property, buildings, etc. Of course, it pains me to hear that you had to sell 70% of your business to get that funding. But again, if you had to do it all over again, I wonder if you could have taken on smaller bits of financing earlier in terms of dilution to your equity to have gotten to your business to the point where there was enough cash supported by contracts that you have that you could have gone to more conventional financing solutions like banks to finance it. Of course, that's all hindsight at this point, but that would be my suggestion, just in terms of the sector and the industry you're in.
Okay, but the question is, do you think that there is a possibility of finding investors in any country for such companies?
Again, I think when you're talking about the construction industry, that's well understood. And obviously, I don't know the Haiti market very well, but in emerging markets around the world, where are people making most of their money? Real estate. So in terms of looking in the investor community, finding angels or potential seeds or family offices that have made their money through real estate holdings, those kind of people can not only fund you, but also potentially give you good advice in terms of how to scale the business.
I think we are short of time. We've already overshot the time. So I'm going to just wrap up and then ask concluding remarks. So I would just say, things that you really pointed out and which I think are very important, what you mentioned about at the appropriate stage, that whichever stage that you are in, that appropriate risk, return, reduce that and work towards that. I think that's a very powerful thing because that encompasses everything that they should focus on, right, is one. And second, that you mentioned about network. That's two critical things that I think you brought out very, very clearly. And the network would consist of mentors and other parts, is one thing.
Thank you.
So I think that's a very good point that you brought out, and that's something that was a takeaway for all entrepreneurs. And you had mentioned about the fact that how businesses are changing from going more towards B2B, SaaS, enterprise business. I think that's a critical thing. So, that has been in the background for a long time as one, and that's very critical at this point of time. Lots of businesses are coming up. So it's obviously the time for money to go into that as one. And the second part of it that you mentioned about the fact that we are at a stage now where investments are at a peak now, right? So it's a good time to be an entrepreneur, right? Having said that, I would like for both of you to conclude in terms of from an India, US, global perspective, not just India, US, from a global entrepreneurship perspective, the seed and VC sector, what do you see?
Well, Rima, just underscoring that it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. I think if you look at where we are on the innovation cycle of so many new technologies, you look at the frontier tech such as AR, VR, artificial intelligence, obviously getting a lot of funding today. So we're at some really exciting times and in terms of being an entrepreneur. So wish you a lot of luck as you scale your business. And one thing that really didn't come up in our conversation that I just mentioned for all the entrepreneurs, not just the Indian ones, but there are very strong diaspora communities back in the markets that you're targeting, or particularly in the US. In the Silicon Valley, organizations like TIE or the...
and TIE has innumerable number of chapters all over the world. So not just Silicon Valley.
And Nandini, what was the organization that the Silicon Valley to India?
Yes, so thank you for bringing up that. I appreciate that, Rima and Andy. So
I'll turn it to you, Nandini, but just saying that, tapping those resources
is very important.
It's great.
Right, so maybe I'll wrap up both this thing and I'll take Andy. So thank you. First of all, Rima, thanks for great moderation. You built great bridges between us and them, so appreciate that. So a few things. There was never a better time in the history of mankind or womankind to be an entrepreneur than it is today. Never was. You're standing at a cusp where an entrepreneur is celebrated and people are aware that an entrepreneur has the potential to solve local and global problems. So that is there. Secondly, just because it's a great time doesn't mean that your struggle is going to be any less. So I don't want to disillusion you or at the same time give you wrong perspective of what it is. But entrepreneurs are self-selected people who realize that it's going to be difficult, but they have the grit and they have the tenacity to say we are going to overcome. And please remember, by far, barring anything else that we have discussed, the most important thing is your belief in yourself, not in that product, because products would change, markets change, things change. But you must remember that your belief in yourself to find a way to be a successful entrepreneur is by far the most important thing, and don't let anybody take that away from you. Whether it's a VC or an angel investor or what have you, it's you that you have to count on. You're the most valuable entity that a VC is going to invest in, and not in your product or your technology. So that's something.
I think that's a very, very powerful point you mentioned.
Thank you. And
I
referring.
just want to say is the fact that, you know, in Hindi they say, hum honge kamyab.
Yes.
That's the part that you would know.
It's beautiful that hum honge kamyab. And to say what Andy said, I am very, very honored that myself and William Rue, who is the CEO of GE Digital, have been asked to co-chair a Silicon Valley India initiative. And in that, we are looking in multiple sectors, energy, clean tech, infrastructure, healthcare, but our flagship project is focusing on empowering women. And we have called it Balancing the Equation. So we think that it will allow for a much stronger economy with women's participation. Women are the solution. So as we are building on balancing the equation, obviously we will need to lean and turn to making sure that both men and women are successful. So it's not just for women. But I just wanted to say we look forward to having many more interactions with you under that umbrella also. And Andy, thanks for reminding, and Rima, thanks for having us here. Just one last thing. Cannot thank Jess, State Department, White House, and Niti Aayog enough. It takes a lot to host 1,500 people from all over the world. You guys have been great entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
And as an investor, I would invest in you anytime.